Hi, I'm Jerry Portwood, host of the Queer Love podcast, and I got to tell you how happy I am to have Jeremy Atherton Lin as a guest on the Queer Love podcast. When I read his debut book, Gay Bar, Why We Went Out, I was blown away by his ability to map queer identity onto disappearing nightlife spaces. Then, with his second book, Deep House, The Gayest Love Story Ever Told, Jeremy shifted from public dance floors to domestic cross border romance under the shadow of the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act. Both books, which braid personal narrative with deep research and social history, provide an incredible opportunity to explore how queer intimacy, geography, and legal structures intersect and the various ways we put ourselves together, and what being legitimized by the state can do to our identities and relationships. Thanks so much for joining me on the Queer Love podcast, Jeremy.
Hello, thank you for having me. Finally.
Yeah, no, I'm excited because I read Gay Bar, I guess, a few years ago. I even have the soap that came with it when I got the book. It's
Oh my
a
God,
bar of soap. It's in my bathroom right now. Uh,
that's right.
I've been wanting to talk to you because I guess I'm a little envious of what you've been able to do in these books and what I hope I will do eventually in the books I'm working on. But before I dive into the meat of the books, I want to talk about the US cover for Deep House, which depicts a naked man in a galley kitchen. It's a photograph by Jack Pearson, an artist I know really well. I mean, not personally, but I've worked with him over the years. And it really combines the sexiness and domesticity at the core of Deep House. So I just want to know why that photo for the book.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say I totally relate to you on the envy thing. I think that I've been thinking a lot about how we're told that envy is a kind of, there's a literary critic called Sienna Guy who talks about it as it's perceived as an ugly feeling, like something that just obstructs us, whereas something like anger is meant to be useful. But I do believe that envy can be useful as well. So I do hear you on that. And then as for the cover, yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a certain degree of envy there too, because two books that I love that come to mind have Jack Pearson covers, Fascination, which is a compendium of shorter works by Kevin Killian, and Cool for You, an early Eileen Miles book. I think the challenge was generally, it's funny because it goes to the question of like what's nonfiction, and we don't tend to use images from my own archive on the cover. I took the photographs that are in Gay Bar, but they're not photographs of me and my partner on either the UK or the US version of Deep House. So the challenge is when you're finding a surrogate, like what does that surrogate look like? You know, I'm mixed race. Like how can you find bodies that feel like they are inviting people in rather than shutting down the conversation? Like how can you be represented by somebody else, basically? And that challenge was proving a bit insurmountable. So I created a mood board for my publishers and included that exact Jack Pearson image on it, thinking that they would kind of try to figure out a way to pick up on the tone. But they decided that it was so good that they were actually going to get the image, which was very flattering to me because it will be a bigger investment than like a Shutterstock photo.
Right.
So I was really flattered, and I think basically what the solution there was that we decided that we would find a picture that looked like it was somebody who was being gazed at by a lover, being gazed at admiringly in a domestic setting. The light on it is gorgeous. He's got this very twinky body, which I think is kind of surprising in a way. I mean, at one point in time, I put it on Instagram because I was so pleased to do, like, you know, they call it the cover reveal, and then they Instagram wound up taking it down, and weirdly they took it down like several months later. So I argued the case, and then they put it back up on it, or they kind of accepted my whatever argument that that even though it has a bare bum, it still belongs on Instagram. But then it was so after the fact that I wasn't able to get it back up. So there's this that was a bit of a fizzle of a cover reveal because it doesn't exist in perpetuity, but the book itself does. And
Well, all of the images on both your books in the UK and US versions are sexy, which I think is part of it. And you did travel from this sort of sanctuary of the gay bar, the queer space in the first book, and now you're going into those domestic spaces. And I wondered, yeah, how that in your mind, like this book also came so quickly after the first book. Like, was there a had you been working on them at the same time? Like, was there what's the gestation?
Quite quick, especially for Gay Bar. Gay Bar I wrote in under a year. I mean, in both cases, there were previous strands of research that I was doing, like when I went to grad school and just in my sort of notes and recollections. Obviously, Deep House I've been writing in a way since I lived it, which, my partner and I met. It's 30 years ago now that we met. So there is a long gestation period in that sense, but I wrote them both quite quickly. In the case of Gay Bar, I wanted it to be written in a compressed period of time so it had a feeling of spontaneity, like a bar hop might feel, like a night out. I wanted it to feel a little bit like you're in a crowded room and you're sort of shouting above the music, and things are maybe dropped between conversation partners, or you might have an opinion that's a bit lusty or snobby, or whatever kinds of thoughts go through your mind when you're in these kinds of spaces, and that you might potentially not necessarily stand by the next morning. I wanted to have that kind of feeling. Now I've had to be speaking about it ever since, all those kind of spontaneous thoughts. But yeah, and no, you're exactly right in terms of the fact that in terms of the sexiness of both covers, both of these areas, like sort of in Deep House, marriage equality, immigration equality, and civil rights, and in the previous book, Gay Bar and Nightlife Spaces, I think a lot of times, in order to get towards something that feels like a kind of legitimacy or recognition, people play this kind of respectability politics
Yeah.
card. And I think it's taken of, there's a new generation that kind of does it in a slightly different way, but it still has this product of desexualizing the bodies that we're standing up for and alongside each other. So it was really important for me in both of those cases for them to be super sex forward books. In the case of Gay Bar, I've kind of gotten the gist that it's had its detractors in terms of people kind of taking umbrage that one of my motivations for going out in the book is a sort of thirstiness and desire, and it was kind of important to me as a writer to show how these places are full of sexual frisson and experimentation and risk, and that sometimes a sense of community and connection that you make in that is unexpected. It comes out of that more gradually, or it's fleeting, and sometimes it's very long lasting. The meet cute of me and my partner is planted in Gay Bar. We met on a night out.
That's what I loved about it too, because I'm not ashamed of telling people about it. I met my partner, who we've been together now 25 years, on my third pill of ecstasy one night at a bar and like an after party kind of thing. And it's meant to not be a thing that lasts, and people don't think that that's how it's going to be, and it can. And so being able to read another narrative where it's like, hey, this is how it worked out, and I think it's good for our generation and also younger generations to know that that's a possibility, and that you never know what's going to happen, and you still obviously have to struggle to keep it going. Obviously, you write a lot about the struggles.
Yeah, you're finding new ways of ecstasy. That's great. Congratulations.
So I want to talk about you. You mentioned your partner, and I know I hopefully will be able to talk about what's going on currently. But in the first book, you have this great nickname, the famous blue raincoat, and in Deep House, you kind of switch to the second person intimate of you. And I wondered that decision of one, the protection of him, and then also of that decision, because often we're also told in writing, don't use the second person.
Yeah, that's something that I wasn't aware of, which I think sometimes, I guess, ignorance is bliss, or can be quite a generative thing. Or maybe I forgot the rule. And it's a kind of a separate strand, but I mean, I was been thinking a lot recently about how many things I write about actually that are about kind of like when you don't get the memo, or what your blind spots are, and how they can be generative. But yeah, I didn't hear that until I we were in doing the UK tour of the hardcover, and somebody asked that question, like, "Oh, you're the first thing you're told on day one of a creative writing class is not to use a second person." And but I mean, famous blue raincoat is like the most ridiculous nickname. It sort of would be kind of hard to sustain throughout the whole book. It was really fun and playful for me. I think I hadn't really thought about it, but I think it was really inspired by just sort of kind of left field experimental and absurdist literature that that was influential with me when I was a younger writer. The book The Dream Life of Balzo Snell comes to mind by Nathaniel West. Just like things that seem a little bit ludicrous. So that nickname is obviously from the Leonard Cohen song, and I think people who know him just really feel like he's such a mild mannered person, but for some reason the word famous just like suits him because he has this quiet magnetism. In Deep House, I knew that it would just feel like pummeling the reader over the head to use that word all the time, famous. And so I think I just started writing it in the second person quite organically. One thing that was helpful was The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, because she addresses her partner Harry in the second person in that book. So yeah, I'd seen it been done before. And I think it winds up working. I think it wound up being quite a freeing thing. I think sometimes when you change your own rules, it can be so freeing. Again, like you said, there's a protective element because he was living undocumented in San Francisco. So there's a kind of anonymity in that, and obviously a paradox in that when I do refer to him as famous, there's this irony that he's had to go undercover and sort of like lose his identity to a certain degree.
And be infamous.
Yes.
But are you guys in a safe place now? How has that shifted in the last couple years?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about nonfiction is that it's never over. And, you know, the marriage equality and civil partnership laws that have enabled us to live together in the UK have felt quite sound to people, and a sort of like a done and dusted thing. But obviously, these seem to be precarious again after the Dobbs decision. Clarence Thomas specifically was explicit in his intention to go after Obergefell, which is the same sex marriage decision. And in subsequent cases as well, not in the kind of primary holding of a Supreme Court case, but in the supporting opinions, justices on the Supreme Court have asserted that they don't think that it's an inevitable right that you have to bring your spouse into the country. So that's slowly kind of being codified. It's quite a pernicious thing. As well, of course, border crackdowns have become so much fiercer. I mean, I think basically the things that we were paranoid about in the book, looking over our shoulder, kind of living in fear. I mean, we lived in so much fun, and I hope that readers feel like it's a really good time. Those passages where he's living undocumented, there's a lot of a sense of adventure and wonder and curiosity and risk. But we were living in fear, and that they would have been largely unfounded because what was then called INS and then morphed into ICE tended to not be in such aggressive pursuit, and when they were, to adhere to protocol. So it's almost like my paranoias in the book have written the rule book of how ICE operates today.
You, it was a great reminder. I was in Atlanta in college in 1996, which is where a lot of the book begins. And later, I saw the performance artist Tim Miller do a piece called Glory Box, which was about being in a binational, what he called it, he didn't call it transnational, he called it binational relationship with his partner who is an Australian citizen. And so I remember being educated about that, and as ambivalent as I was about same-sex marriage at the time, realizing like, oh wait, there's these things that are at risk, and just wanting to be together. And you write so beautifully about that, about the issue wasn't really about marriage, it was about borders and trying to be together. And I felt like you had a bit I mean, you also talk about being domestic outlaws and that sort of thing. So, can you explain a little bit about your both of your progressions in that? Because it also you didn't want to get married.
Yeah, so many people I think that were became a part of the, in a way, became a part of the narrative of marriage equality were ambivalent about marriage. I mean, specifically, what comes to mind is, the case in California, which was the first to seek a federal recognition of marriage license between two men. That's because one of them was Australian, and they were just trying to get him to stay in the country. And their lefty comrades, on the gay scene weren't necessarily supportive of the root of marriage. It just seemed to them, as it did to us, to be the most viable option. However, madcap it seemed that we were going to be able to achieve marriage. It seemed like the soundest solution. Yeah, I speak about in the book about how when I was younger, and early on in university and still a teenager, I did have this kind of feeling, that I should be supporting marriage equality, as a sort of, I guess, assimilationist model, and kind of following in the footsteps unknowingly of more conservative pundits like Andrew Sullivan, whose case for gay marriage was almost a kind of, he presented it as a kind of, a health policy to encourage monogamy. And it was gradually that I kind of disentangled myself from those kinds of arguments. And then, just as I was freeing myself up to be radical and a slut and all those fun things, here it came about that I was faced with this challenge of falling in love across borders, and something happens where you start trying to figure out how to square your more utopian ideals with the realities of, the admin, the bureaucracy. I think Maggie Nelson, who we spoke about earlier, has said in an interview, she doesn't believe in marriage and yet she got married. She's not alone.
Yeah, and Andrew Sullivan was already problematic in the 90s, but you also had a sort of quasi-conservative uh, gay Catholic who was into leather kink. So it was very confusing for a lot of people. Uh, because you mentioned him, I have a clip from the book that I'd like to play. It's from actually chapter 12. So I don't know if you've heard this before, but I'm
Of
going to
course
see,
I haven't.
I'm gonna
Well,
see how it goes.
I don't know how many authors listen to their own audiobooks, so.
Here we go.
In the 1984 book The Male Couple, the authors, a male couple, cited a study of 156 men in gay relationships lasting from 1 to 37 years, finding that only 7 couples, none who'd been together over 5 years, were exclusive, as if monogamy is just a phase for gay men to grow out of, which stands in contrast to public advocates of gay marriage depicting decades of gay rights progress as parallel to a lifespan, suggesting time had come for those still spreading seed stuck in the adolescent stage to mature and settle down. In 1998, conservative gay pundit Andrew Sullivan wrote of how a proclivity for quick and easy sex was, in fact, a desperate and failed search for some kind of intimacy that evidenced both our wounded self-esteem as homosexuals and our general enculturation as men. To which queer theorist Michael Warner retorted, even if gay men did suffer from wounded self-esteem, the most likely result for them would not be promiscuity, which calls for a fair amount of courage and dignity on the part of those who defy the stigma and abjection associated with it, but a compulsive idealization of love and a desperate need to have validation conferred on their intimate lives through state-certified marriage.
So I wanted to share that clip, one, because you go into the archive and you remind us of the literature, right? Of what was the discourse at the time, which I think so many people have forgotten. And also I loved hearing Michael Warner talk about this idealization of love. And I think sometimes people might think because I have something called the Queer Love Project and the Queer Love Podcast that I have that sort of idealization, which is not necessarily the case. Um, and and also this tension between oh, are all the gays out there just fucking all the time? Or are all they, or should they all be wanting to fall in love and be in relationships? And we still are having that same debate and that same slut shaming and the same, everything that's going on with it. So I felt like it felt so relevant, and yet people probably don't remember that we were doing this 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Indeed. And I was aware that sort of subsequent books in the wake of the Obergefell decision sort of erased the anti-marriage argument to an extent. And one of the reasons that it's so present in the book is because, and I think the same thing happens in Gay Bar too, which is where you're really trying to kind of figure out a way to combine very intelligent and open ways of looking at the world with the circumstances that you find yourself in. And I think readers who relate to my point of view maybe pick up on that kind of sense of sort of being lost. It's a kind of feeling of like being invited to a meeting and feeling like you agree with the gist of what people are saying, but you can't help but feel indicted by the rhetoric because you can't figure out a way to live those ideals. I think that's why it's so important to be present. And also, like, there's an alternative history where maybe I'm in the same circumstance that I am now, living in the UK with my partner, but through a better route, or a route that actually proved to be more sound, as I put it earlier, than I thought marriage was going to be. I mean, I'm on a indefinite leave to remain in the UK, and the Reform Party, which stands a chance, despite being quite far right political party, of gaining mainstream power and becoming the leadership, have set their sights on that visa. So it's just like, and then like earlier I was talking about the equivalents in the UK about people trying to destabilize these things. So where we've kind of always viewed, I guess, queer theory as being a kind of like pursuit of destabilizing norms, at the same time the right wing is coming for their own forms of destabilization. And one thing that was a really instructive experience when I was writing the book was I kind of felt like, oh, have I just settled down into this kind of like bougie domestic bliss and have lost the sense of precarity that permeated our lives when he was living undocumented in San Francisco? And I started thinking about the various ways, like neighbors that you don't necessarily agree with, and you feel like their sense of boundaries is a little bit invasive or off putting or puts you on guard. Like, there are these various things that started coming my way that were a bit unsettling. And it made me realize how, you can feel like you're safe as houses, as the expression goes, and close the door. But there's always some gap, there's always some, cracked open window or something that leaves you vulnerable to
Yeah.
the outside world. And it was really important for me to remember that feeling.
Well, you also do a great job of talking about what you just mentioned, the idea that queer theory always seemed so far ahead and it made you feel less than. And I know that feeling as well.
Yeah.
Um, and this idea, you also, made me think of Edie Windsor. So I met her, and obviously she's a white woman who had great privilege and wealth, but she also had to hide her private life, which was she was quite slutty as well, and like had a lot of lovers, and was, not the perfect person, but the lawyers wanted her to be that way for the case that she put, that changed DOMA. And talking to her before she died, she was really blunt about that, and was talking about how she wasn't the perfect lesbian that everybody wanted her to be. And we're always dealing with that, right? The validation of having to have these organizations and other people say something, and then knowing that you're not quite the thing that people want or expect you to be.
I mean, the Lawrence v. Texas case is just wild. And, I bring in an author, Dale Carpenter, as a sort of companion through those pages because he really wrote the book on that case. It's called Flagrant Conduct. And Yeah, like the people who were involved in that case were like a total mess, and like one could say reprobates, and not lovers, certainly not monogamous lovers, possibly not even having sex at all. I mean, it's such a messy case that just involves like racism and drunkenness, and like I feel like the only thing that I can sort of do as a writer is sort of like discover these messes that I find fascinating and kind of impart them to the reader. And they're instructive, and it's kind of like I still don't quite understand how they're instructive. Like, is it a good thing that ACLU lawyers can come along and sort of clean up the narrative and present a version of it that might play well to Amy Conan Barrett or whatever, like, create a story out of the ungovernable mess that is actual experience. But for whatever it's worth, just being a writer who is, I guess, quite persistent in allowing the messy parts to remain a part of what goes into print. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And speaking of that, I wanted to play another clip. This one's from chapter 8, and since we were talking about protection and sex, this is a moment that I think a lot of people will appreciate.
We came to know trust as both robust and fragile. Unprotected by either of our governments, we sheltered each other. We found a way of feeling safe together. Interior. Whether or not you were born a male or a citizen, the right for us to have oral and anal sex at home was not protected across the United States. More generally, the right to privacy is not explicitly stated anywhere in the U.S. Constitution. Rather, it has been found gradually and tentatively by some Supreme Court justices through penumbra, a metaphorical reference to the outer edge of a shadow, one could say the gray areas. The relevant Supreme Court cases often regard the interior of not only a household, but a body.
So I just found this passage where you actually are talking about how sex took on this intense, meaningful form of protection and trust, and how sex was also on the table, really vital for people to understand that why this is still important to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, every household that is in the book that's not our own is there because there's been some kind of invasion of people's rights to get down in the privacy of their own home. So there's been a question of the boundaries of the home, or there's a question of border crossing, national border crossing. So there are all these boundaries. That the name Deep House kind of came to me really early on as a play on the musical genre, but again, like I said in the clip about the interior of a household as well as the interior of a body.
Well, and you also talk about your grandparents who were Chinese immigrants and their arranged marriage.
Sure, yeah, and the border crossing that each of our families had done, which had inspired us in many ways for the possibility of crossing borders. But then as we grew older, we both recognized that there is a problematic aspect of a British person migrating to South Africa in the case of my partner's family in apartheid era South Africa, and in my case, a Chinese family immigrating to Taiwan. So this open question comes out of that, like, what happens when you're sort of on the wrong side of of an immigration movement? And I think that's kind of pertinent in various ways to gay populations finding a home in neighborhoods and trying to carve out a way of life without gentrifying. But yeah, I think that the recentness of all of it is really it's funny because it's time stamped. I hadn't quite realized how time stamped I had made it in the opening of a chapter where we are in a van listening to the song Milkshake by Khalees, which was like
Yes, yes,
just
yes.
about to be released on the radio. It was like a pre-release that we heard, and it was the first time I heard it we were really scared because we were being wimps in rural Oregon, like a couple of gays from San Francisco might be, especially if one's undocumented and you feel like you might be in hostile terrain. And I was just like loving hearing this scuzzy new track and like feeling like I wanted to feel safe inside the van, away from the outside world. And then when we landed back in California, it was just after that the decision of Lawrence v. Texas was announced, which struck down any existing state anti-sodomy laws. And I hadn't really intended to timestamp it that way, but it's quite helpful to realize how recent it is, like what those laws were still existing by the time that Milkshake by Khalees came out. Like, I think it's these kinds of things are surprising to people when they realize how very recent it is, and all the more a reminder of how precarious they can continue to be.
So I have one more big question. But before you do, I'm so glad you brought that up because I do want to talk about the music of it all. Music is so important to both books. And I know you've created a playlist. It's on Spotify, and I'm going to share it with people in the notes with the podcast. Although I don't think that Milkshake's on that playlist.
It should be. I'll correct that if it's not. I'll certainly correct that if it's not.
But I was curious. Just let's talk about house music and dance music, and it is called deep house, and you said that was intentional for multiple reasons, but you're obviously interested in certain types of community and what music does in those moments. But I also know that I went searching for my tribe in the dance floor and did not find it necessarily.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about the music side of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a bit of an irony in terms of the fact that, or I guess it doesn't necessarily do what it says on the tin in terms of the music genre, because the music that's throughout Deep House tends to be like Americana, like Emmylou Harris, or in more contemporary vocals by Cat Power. There's stuff like La Tigra and the Moldy Peaches in there, and bands like the Magnetic Fields. And yeah, so there's a lot of kind of like guitar-based music, and even really noisy guitar bands too, like Lightning Bolt and Unwound are in there. So the idea of house music as a kind of instrumentalizing, galvanizing force is a bit of a subtext. And there's an endnote in the book that describes how one of the things that I was fascinated by in the competing etymology of the term house music. One version has it that it's based on the infamous nightclub The Warehouse, and so it's about the public sphere, whereas Larry Hurd, who is an incredible deep house pioneer, spoke about how you could use synthesizers at home to make music, and hence house music. So it contributes to that sort of tension between the public and private. But that's super conceptual, and that's kind of like almost like just in my own mind. Like I can kind of justify that way in my own mind. I just sort of liked the bluntness of it, and the feeling of kind of penetration of the idea of the deepness. But yeah, music is incredibly important to me, and I probably resonate with readers who are not just into what is more traditionally classified as gay or queer music, but kind of using a gay or queer lens to appreciate all kinds of music. And I think in my process, putting together music playlists and mixes is incredibly important and informative for getting the mood right. I mean, I always kind of think everybody's trying to make music, no matter what creative field that you're in. And when I put the playlist together, it's about kind of transitioning from, a ballad to something that's a bit more up-tempo, from one kind of vocal to another, trying to figure out how to blend, but also the moments that are jarring. And so I think my books feel a bit like that, like a collage, or kind of like you've got multiple tabs open on your laptop. Deep House feels a bit like there's a shopping tab and a porn tab, but then like, something's gone down the rabbit hole and found a Supreme Court opinion, getting nitty gritty in the weeds of a legal opinion.
I mean, the way you braid those things together, I am very in awe of that skill, and I'm going to try to learn how to do it better. And I will say I love the playlist because I was just out of town in Chicago driving around. I rented a car, and there was a station called Pride, And just what you said is true. Like the songs that were on this, and they kept talking about our culture. This is our music, and I was like, this is not the music that I would think of. But okay. Whereas your playlist, I definitely, maybe it's just my age, but I related to a lot more. We recently had Barry Walters, who's also a music critic, and he talked a lot about house music, and that's in his book, which we talked about. So I love that there's this connection with music because it is so vital for so many of us. I think that people should also read Deep House to read some of the best sex writing that I've read in a long time. I mean, the way you talk about the negotiation between you and your partner of who's going to be the top and bottom and all this stuff, I thought, wow, this is really well done. So thanks.
Thanks.
So my last question is that since the subtitle is the gayest love story ever told,
Yeah,
I
sorry about that. I've been apologizing for it ever since.
well, I just am wondering what is your personal definition of either queer love or gay love and how that's evolved from that, 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. sweaty dance floor to a decades long partnership.
I mean, the thing about the subtitle is all nonfiction writers hate subtitles. So there's a facetious joke towards the publishing industry, really inherent in that. And I kept coming up with things that were too oblique and was hearing that the response was that it wasn't clear enough. And one of my editors said, "What really is this book?" And I said, "Well, how about this?" I texted her, and the next day it was New York loves it, and it's being printed, and um,
Well, I guess if you had the title Deep House, they needed something that was more on the nose.
what it is that, first of all, I think that any play on the word greatest in the era of MAGA is valid, so gayest and greatest. And I certainly would not have stuck with it if I didn't incorporate the historical cases of lovers across the decades and even centuries before us. And so, I guess in answer to your question, I think that's probably what feels like striving towards something like a definition, is that kind of openness, that kind of expansiveness, that idea that, like, it's not a closed form of love, but it means that you're providing shelter to other people. I use the example of the chuppah in Jewish marriage traditions about a kind of house without walls,
Hmm.
and the idea that if you seem to form a kinship with a certain person, it becomes this kind of magnetic force that makes other people feel like they're safe the way that they can see you entrusting each other. And we've been that to a lot of people. And probably one of the things that we come close to something like feeling proud about is that we've been able to afford that sense of safety, I suppose, or welcoming to other people. So I think yeah, so I think the fact that it's our love story, but it's in the story of all these other lovers as well, and then it's passed on to the reader and it's meant to be a part of their loves as well, is kind of what is really teasing around in a more serious way in that subtitle.
Do you feel that extra layer or burden of pressure of now, like people are like, oh, I'm gonna look at Jeremy and his partner's relationship and like that's a success story and like that sort of thing?
In real life, or people who are from people who don't know me who have read
First, the readers, and second, your friends.
the I mean, I the readers there's a line in the book about how we kind of basically, like, the glue was doing the admin. I mean, we just sort of, like, we knew if we had to work this hard to be together, and queer couples put in a lot of unpaid labor doing paperwork to validate their very existence, and that was a kind of triumph of not a triumph of adversity in certain cases between us. It's like a triumph over, like, the monotony of doing this kind of, like, all the boring stuff. Yeah, and so I think, and then I've had a couple, like, feedback from, messages from younger readers who were saying that there's something very familiar about our relationship to them as a more commonplace model amongst younger queer couples, whereas we were kind of quite unknowingly and unwittingly sort of like doing something that was a bit non-normative. I mean, I can talk about in the book about how we weren't doing that intentionally. We were just kind of like following our pursuits and our passions. And among friends, I do think that we provide some semblance of, I don't know if they're inspired by the adventure or the stability in our relationship, but I certainly know that people like us as a pair. And again, I think it's that idea of like seeing two people interact with each other with a mutual trust and sense of humor that makes people feel at ease that they can become, especially if you're perpetuating it in a way where it doesn't feel like a closed system, but rather like this is open to you too, to kind of come into our world, whether it be like playing a game with our young nephew, or friends who are other couples, or friends who are not in a relationship, or over the years it's also been lovers, and bringing people more intimately into the relationship in that way. So yeah, and it's constantly evolving. I mean, now we live in this small town on the English Channel, and yeah, it's just like I'm walking, and I say in the book that love brings loss to mind, and I think it's a bit of a melancholy feeling, but I do think about it, and I do think that people think about it with other lovers, and so now when we take walks on the Esplanade and up the cliff over the sea, I'm constantly looking for real estate on benches that don't have a memorial plaque on it yet.
Oh,
Like, oh, that would be a good spot. Like, if I'm the first to go, like you can you can dedicate this bench to me, and that's a very long-winded way of saying that it's still touching on this idea of expansiveness, that we're only dust in the wind, but like the sea's going to be there longer than us. So the idea about opening yourself up onto the world.
well, I love that you said that about stability and adventure. And I guess also there's the second part, or the third part, which is about propagation, which I think as gay men, we're never sure about that part. But, this has been really lovely. And, I want to make sure everybody knows that Deep House is available in paperback. It's obviously available in audio. And also everybody should be reading Gay Bar, listening to Gay Bar as well. You have a good bookend of two books. Is there another project in the works that we can wait for?
Yeah, I'm teasing out something about that goes back to when I was younger, and how I formed friends, and back then, and who I was. I think trying to write about my younger self without feeling, I realized I was kind of feeling a bit sorry for myself as a young person, and the more I write myself as being a bit of a little jerk, the more the sentences kind of take off, and the sort of narrative starts picking up. So yeah, I think that
I'm
maybe,
sure there'll be a scene where it's like you trying to ollie and failing as a skater, because you
I
mentioned that.
mean, I think my failures and blind spots are probably on every page. And I hope people can relate to that in some way. I hope they don't necessarily come to me as an authority, but rather as a companion. And I think in this next book, probably it's going to be a little bit less research heavy and more pure memoir, for lack of a better word. It seems like a space that I've kind of like earned the place to be, to just sort of maybe sublimate some of those sociological ideas and really kind of just be in the moment, what it's like to be a kid.
Well, I'll be reading, so thank you. And
Thanks
thanks
for
for
saying
having me.
that.
Thanks for talking about all this on the Queer Love podcast. It's been amazing.
Oh, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And if you're a new listener to the Queer Love podcast and aren't already a subscriber to the Queer Love Project, you can find us on Substack. It's a platform where LGBTQ plus people can share stories and experiences about whatever love means to them. We keep all our words free and publish original personal essays, poetry, and interviews. So go to queerloveproject.substack.com and subscribe and support us today.